It's no secret that, as of 2024, we're in a time where companies are too stingy to really put their faith in anything on its own, along with increased segmentation in the aftermath of the streaming wars. So their shortcut, along with laying off all the damn people who make their art of course, is to simply prioritize works where the fanbase is already built in by default. This way, the hard part is already done for them, and on top of that, because they always want the biggest audience imaginable for their fiscal quarter spreadsheets, these are often given clear favoritism and bias in the dwindling marketing available. This is even extended to forcing in what could easily serve as a whole new property as an adaptation of something classic or popular, often to its detriment. And if you do have an original idea, make it through development, you better have the best prayer in order for it to see greenlight for production, and even more of one for it to actually reach both completion and release, because even that is not a guarantee anymore. So naturally, what few original animations that have made it through in the past couple years, while not without devoted fans, have largely gone unnoticed by the wide public, which, while generally not the show nor the audience's fault, is frustrating to see happen so constantly. In particular, there are 3 adult animated shows that I personally like to call the Sci-Fi trilogy that got away, all delivering something incredibly fresh and could have well ushered in a fresh new wave, but were brought down simply by coming out in the wrong place at the wrong time. The first of these was Pantheon, on AMC Plus of all places, about a tech giant taking entire human brains and uploading them as a form of computer data, which is every bit as terrifying as it sounds. Despite critical acclaim, it got outright written off by the company in less than a year, with a full completed second season doomed to sit on the shelf forever, though it did at least manage to surface in Australia. The second was Fired on Mars, a one-season wonder on HBO Max about an outer space office and a particularly troubled employee doing everything he can to survive with the rough lot he's given. This one was only announced a few days before dropping, and got caught in the transition between the service's looming downgrade. But the last of these is the one that's the most up in the air in terms of its fate as of this writing, and simultaneously, in my opinion, the most groundbreaking and amazing of the 3. One that encompasses everything I love about what the medium of animation is capable of delivering, and one that managed to somehow dethrone Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur as my top animated show of the year. Sorry, Lunella. That show is Scavengers Reign. Created by Joseph Bennett and Charles Huetner, the concept began life as an independent short made for Adult Swim in 2016, simply called Scavengers, focused on 2 stranded scientists on the surreal alien planet Vesta Minor, who, without sharing any dialogue, weaponizes the flora and fauna of the planet, all operating in a way that seems bizarre to us, but natural for them, in order to get a little glimpse at their old life back on Earth. The short was almost psychedelically trippy, it was extremely ambietic, and it was nothing the people watching had ever seen before. So naturally, it was met with heavy acclaim. At first, all official parties seemed content with leaving it at that, but ambitions only grew larger when Toonami creative lead Jason DeMarco passed the word to the network's then EVP Mike Lazo, with the proposal of potentially turning the concept into a full-fledged series, and a pilot episode was developed from there. At first, Bennett really wanted to stick with the no dialogue approach, but the Adult Swim execs advised against it, so he relented. Not that the trouble stopped there, as around the time the pilot was completed in 2019, Lazo decided he didn't want to move forward. He would retire at the end of the year. This really didn't set right with Jason, so he kept the pitch and pilot on hand until the right opportunity came to give it another go, which happened to be when the adjacent streaming service HBO Max launched a couple years later. He showed it to Billy Wee and Aaron Davidson, They loved it, and the series was officially greenlit for 12 episodes.
I helped develop the series with Max, and backed away a bit. Then, when some of the Max team got laid off, they asked me to come in as the exec on board of the show. It's been 5 years. I knew if everyone just got out of the fucking way, they would make a great show. I tried to help with that part.
And, despite the odds stacked against them, the series released on the service in October 2023, releasing in weekly batches of 3s. Unfortunately, the rollout was rather quiet. Sure, there was major acclaim from everyone who had watched it, from critics, journalists, animation enthusiasts, and even noteworthy figures like Trey Parker. But even with all that, it just didn't seem to get that much attention among the masses. A lot of it can be attributed to just not going far enough in marketing it, of course. But I think it also highlights how the reactionary state of social media by this time pretty much discouraged positive word of mouth to really get around. In any case, I believe this show more than deserves to be talked about, and in this video, I hope to describe all you need to know about why that is.
What if there are survivors?
Well, for their sake, let's hope there aren't any.
To describe the concept as simply as I can, we follow some assorted crew members of a freight-carrying spacecraft called, aptly enough, the Demeter, which has crash-landed on an alien planet, the aforementioned Vesta Minor, with an unusual ecosystem that they must learn and traverse through if they ever want any chance to survive and possibly escape.
Are we gonna die out here? Grab anything that's useful. We're leaving for the Demeter tonight.
That's what the show is about, but the thing is, it's not content to merely tell a straightforward story. This is a show that seeks out to be as immersive as possible. And I don't just mean in a technical sense, although that is certainly god tier as I'll describe later. I mean how the exact way the story is paced and structured is so meticulous and focused on letting you take in every new environment and ecological function, every whimsical and dangerous beat, and even the way it balances out the multiple plot lines going on. See, we actually follow 3 different groups. One about cargo specialist Ozzy trying to adapt alongside a stray helper bot known as a Levi.
Marvelous. Well, just let me know if it becomes a problem.
I will continue to monitor.
Another about the ship's commander Sam and another crewmate Ursula, as all they can do is focus on the mission at hand and use whatever they encounter as obstacles or aids on their route.
Come on, let's get some sleep.
I just want to go home. That's all.
And finally, you have Kamen, all alone and in the roughest physical and mental place, succumbing to most of the whims of all the creatures he meets.
Can you slow down a minute? I'm not feeling very...
And if that wasn't enough, every so often they flash back to what these characters were going through before disaster struck the Demeter, sometimes showing these plot lines intersect or just delving more into a particular character's backstory. They never appear just to force feed information either. They always in some way tie back to how they're currently feeling in the moment, and it all has its own brand of build-up too.
I'm in charge, goddammit!
Complemented with the first handful of flashbacks also involving their characters wanting to get out of ruts, it makes the structure a great and clever way to demonstrate just how little their behaviors changed after they became stranded, as well as how much they vaguely parallel each other.
Fuck you, Sam!
Not to say there aren't some major signs of danger early on, with that cave full of fucking corpses and then Ursula's body getting grotesquely infected. But they are pretty quick and sparse, for now. I think it's also incredibly important to note that these cuts aren't for flow reasons either. They're all playing out more or less in real time between one another. Anytime there's some kind of substantial non-nighttime wait going on, we check in on what someone else is up to. This is to put to effective use not just in keeping the action up, but also how much of an impact it leaves a few times they manage to intersect in present day.
A key question we asked was, Wouldn't it be interesting if these characters who were totally separate and were in a long con as far as when they'd actually bump into each other?
Now, I've already done a lot to talk about just what makes Scavengers Reign top quality as a show and a story, but I'm not sure if I fully conveyed to you folks why it's that special. Like, yeah, it's a good show and all, but in the world of overlooked series that never get their due, why must we single this one out? Well, I'm going to group my arguments as to why I think so into 3 categories. Its really striking, smart presentation, the many ways the show plays with tone, and how it uses its characters to convey its many themes. The first big ace card I'll talk about, and the most instantly obvious, is the presentation. And there are many places I could start with here. So I'll start with the environmental design. As we get so many unique set pieces as we explore the planet, you'd think it would get a little overwhelming, but they make the most of each one by making them pretty light in terms of actual texture and detail, which leaves so much open to the imagination. All the shapes that vaguely resemble something we know in our world, but not entirely, all the little foliage, the gigantic branches, and of course, the striking color palettes. Look at how bright and vibrant they are, and how much each one contrasts with one another. Hell, also contrasted with the whites and grays inside the Demeter. Very representative of the liveliness and pureness of the uninterrupted nature surrounding them, as opposed to the dullness of operating freight jobs. And the fact it's often accompanied with some real danger, or at least some unknown phenomena that seems dangerous to us, only further emphasizes just how, for lack of a better term, alien it all is. And on that note, the way that characters are designed and animated work really well in selling this contrast too. Much like the backgrounds, they aren't brimming with detail, but what they do focus on are quite true to reality, which is a daring choice for any Western animated series.
During production, it felt like each director brought something totally different and amazing to the table. And in addition to directing, they were also storyboarding and animating their own episodes. They were very hands-on in a way that feels like a very unorthodox approach to Western animation.
Without any exaggerated designs, the argument could easily be made by unfavorable types that it didn't need to be animated, but I think this choice was essential to making it hit hardest. For one, each and every character has a distinct demeanor to them that, even with their grounded facial features, leaves plenty of room for expression. It never feels like it's being constrained. It feels like the type of extreme reactions we as people normally face. You always know how they're feeling in the moment, but you still are left to feel in a lot of the little nuances. Not to mention how much more painful the body horror looks when it's on figures and proportions so innate to the brain. All this is further brought into life with a very artsy direction, credited mostly to people who had made little independent shorts of their own. And sure enough, much like an independent short, so much focus is put on the little details that seem insignificant in isolation, but all collectively add up to the greater themes and developments. Despite the criticalness of the situation everyone is in, every scene really takes its time to make the constant struggle, caution, and need to adapt really strike the viewers watching. It feels less like a string of events culminating in the story, and more just a beat-by-beat otherworldly hiking trip. You never know if what you're going to see next is something as awe-inspiring as the life cycle of a little egg flower creature, or something as terrifying as a little plant bite causing this really grotesque infection, along with it spawning. Each side really feels like it gets its equal time too. It's not like it comes across as either overly whimsical or overly dour, each side fighting to overtake the other.
The show has this brilliant device that was really set up in the short that we use for the entire series, and I think no matter what is happening with the characters, even as a writer, when these things happen, we would call them processors. So if a character takes a creature and uses it as a breathing mask, they have tubes that go up its nose, and it's converting toxic gases into oxygen. This is just a compelling thing to see out of context, and it's a real strength of the show, so having that set up in the short was huge. You can see there's so many ways we could go with this.
It helps too that the aliens and contraptions seen all over the show are full of little creative touches that add a charming sort of whimsy to the experience. There's stuff like Levi having this big round body supported by these little metallic legs. Like, how's it supporting them? Also, the many creatures that often vaguely resemble Earth creatures, but like I said before, never quite all the way. It's never entirely clear in the moment how dangerous or majestic they actually are. Half the time, neither the characters nor the audience understand in the moment how good or bad something is. It's all up to them to explore, and we are along for the journey. Like, Ozzy getting her skin full of rashes from these little fluff balls, naturally a cause for concern, but then in the next episode, she finds a group of leeches who, much to her surprise, feed off them like it's nothing. And after submerging herself in the pool, clears the whole mess off her body. This is actually one of my favorite scenes because it presents us a very straightforward example of something that, because of the similarities to an Earth parasite, naturally makes us flinch, only to end in a sight that's bizarrely serene, almost like a nice underwater massage, all told through some well thought out staging, and of course, the music. Ah yes, I really need to get into the soundtrack as well, provided by Nicolas Snyder. It's pretty unique in that it doesn't feel like a typical sci-fi score, being heavy on the ambient synth instruments and dominating the sound mix often enough that it feels like an integral part of the immersive experience, rather than merely a complement to the other components that most other shows tend to prioritize. It helps that many of the characters have their own motifs to highlight their respective journeys. Ozzy's theme has these majestic strings that perfectly illustrate her reclusiveness and newfound sense of exploration, almost like it's providing a psychological look into her heart. And with Ursula and Sam, they place notably more emphasis on just communicating an emotionally gripping journey, starting with an almost low rhythm, only to take many sudden changes and ups and downs throughout, from the tranquil and otherworldly to the intense and life-threatening. Kamen, who is naturally given a lot of the more suspenseful tracks, has a particularly heart-stopping scene where his selfish, rogue actions caused a mass disaster that kicked off the show. First is this haunting, almost clock-ticking rhythm after throwing the ship off route. And then in comes the solar flare, slamming into the meter, at which point we are treated to these long, tragic stings. That, combined with the look we get on Kamen upon cutting back to him, nails the absolute pain of this exact moment. It's the perfect depiction of, what the fuck have I done? Even the tracks that relate to a specific key event still feel like they're tied into the characters in some way. You could listen to these tracks on their own without having watched the show at all, and still get a strong idea on what each of these arcs become. They're that well done in working in tandem with the story. And of course, the really unique, seamlessly mixed sound effects are all the icing on the cake.
It felt like with this style, you can get a better grip on the planet. It lent itself to a tactility on the planet that was really nice. That, in combination with the sound design, the ASMR stuff was what we were really going for. A character in the trailer, when you see him rubbing his hand against the tree, I really want to hear that. I want to feel it. As far as the colour, we were trying to have a show grounded as much as you can in a reality that's not on planet Earth. We were allergic to something that felt too radically different. This is just another hue.
But as far as audio-visual splendor can take you, it can only live to its fullest potential when it is complemented with a story execution to match. So, how does it stack up tonally? We've had many cartoons that brought characters through some emotional and physical trauma. We've also had cartoons that really cover some deep themes nestled within its through line, and even those that just feel brutally honest in both consequences and its dialogue. But this one does all three and blends them in a way that makes the experience feel, in layman's terms, real. Even though it obviously takes place on a bizarro alien planet, the way everyone speaks couldn't feel any more true to how you or anyone you'd know would react. Which obviously is part of the pure contrast of the real and surreal going on, but the extent to which they commit to it really makes both the personal and physical stakes all the more hard-hitting. It's like all they can do to give themselves some grounding and familiarity in this madness they're trapped in.
So, hypothetically speaking, in our contracts, could we charge the last couple of months as overtime?
In general, the show takes full advantage of the fact that this is untamed nature with its own ecosystems. And therefore, apart from vague similarities to creatures we know on Earth, there's no real frame of reference for us to know for sure how each encounter will affect our strandees.
We've been looking at Werner Herzog's approach to understanding nature. Predators, prey, parasites, and symbiotic relationships are all normal in that ecosystem. But once you put a human in the middle of it, it can be uncomfortable or appear evil, when it's really just neutral.
Nature is extremely weird the deeper you get, so we decided to just cherry pick and pull from things that already exist in nature and go from there.
This inventive science is only put to even greater effect in how it can frequently escalate from 0 to 100 in a matter of seconds, and it's not exclusive to the extremes of the scale either. Sometimes the tone of the presentation and that of the screenplay is outright contradictory to keep the audience on their toes. This can be seen in Kamen's arc with how much they cut between what he sees in his hypnotized, guilt-ridden stupor and what is actually going on in the wildlife.
Fuck you, Sam!
This class of extremes can also be used to add a sense of dramatic irony. Like going back to Ursula and Sam, the latter's arm treatment is treated by this shaman who ends up providing a rather unorthodox treatment. And it's in this moment that Ursula finds the doctor she ordered isn't all there.
Oh,
God. You know the worst is only yet to come with him. And yet, they build this up by giving Sam a very unexpected burst of energy, constantly working himself out and doing extra work whenever they're resting, all joyously might I add, and while this super cheery tune is playing. Almost intentionally teasing the audience by giving the characters a false sense of security we know isn't there. Which of course, makes the moment the reality sets in all the more brutal. But let's not get too ahead of ourselves. Whenever any scene like this happens, be it cute, scary, innocent, shocking, or even a mix of the above, they will be sure to take as much time with each beat as needed. It never feels like the plot's moving at a sluggish speed, it's just in the very nature of this sort of trek, where every new corner you turn, you'll find a new surprise waiting to be discovered. It'll convey urgency whenever it needs to, be it a scary encounter or just environmental threats, but it's also more than happy to let the characters rest and breathe. And whenever a character stops to take in the current scene, they will make sure you see it in their perspective. It's such a masterful balancing act that leaves every mood settling in your brain even well after it cuts away. This really is the rare show that will make you feel in all the shades you can imagine, and it does so in a manner that only a story with this exact structure, setup, and pacing could ever pull off. And that's not even getting into the actual personal angle. Naturally, there's a ton that can be said about the several characters we follow, from the Demeter and beyond. They all fit enough into archetypes that each one is bound to remind you of someone you've known in your own life, and at least one that you'll personally relate to. But I think what makes this particular cast special is how they're used to naturally communicate the show's multiple dominant themes. In many respects, it is a sort of personal journey for them, requiring them to come to grips with some of their individual vices in order to make it out in one piece. But it's done less in the traditional sense, and more in regards to specific relationships. That, along with the many alien creatures that impact these journeys, gives the whole thing a sort of spiritual feel, and it's partially because of this aspect that every step they take is given so much added weight and importance. Well, before I dive in, I gotta warn you, this is when I'm gonna really go into spoilers, so if you haven't watched Scavengers Reign, please turn the video off and get to it. Believe me when I say you will want to go into the show in particular as blind as you can. Okay.
God, I hate it here.
Let's start with the first two survivors we see in action, probably the most thematically explicit, Ursula and Sam. And right from the moment they enter the screen, they're the most openly fed up of the folks we follow, just doing what they can to survive and being laser focused on getting some kind of escape, even if it means disturbing the environmental cycle. It's all just a dull, tiring rhythm, doubling as a pure means to an end. Of course, the more they have to traverse through untamed territory, the more they have to face it in their own ways. One of the big turning points here being in episode 3, where they come across this wall that Ursula discovers they're able to go through after it's fed. But along the way, her scientist side ends up being enamored by this little anemone nest thing. Three whole minutes are spent just absorbing this little orb alien guiding all the life within before being put to rest. Look at her facial expressions while this is going on. You really are just right there with her taking it in. But of course, Sam doesn't take too kindly of this distraction and feels time is of the essence, a mentality that soon comes to quite literally bite him in the arm. Shit. Fuck. Really, this is all pretty much a big game of fuck around and find out for them, especially Sam, who just continues to deny the danger he's in, both to Ursula and even himself to a degree. The more they both ignore the warning signs, the more their mortality stares them in the face until a breaking point comes.
I always thought I would die somewhere far away from home. You gotta be some kind of maniac to do this kind of work and expect otherwise.
Remember the treatment that Shaman gave him? Well, this is what came of it. Ugh, I still can't look at this without flinching. But from there, it all starts to become a bit of a role reversal, as now Ursula's wanting to rush there for medicine, and Sam just becoming increasingly sensitive to the danger, particularly with his coughs of blood. So when the Demeter comes in sight at last, it should be an exciting moment for both. And indeed, Ursula is sure things will be fine, but it's only at this moment that Sam comes clean with his mortality. And in the particularly gut-punching scene, Ursula has to tearfully part ways with him, while all he can do is lay under this big, beautiful tree. And it's here Sam passes, in total peace with the nature around him. God, I can't stress enough how phenomenal of a scene this is. I summarized it in less than a minute, but this goes on in the episode for like 5. They make you live with this brutal reality hard, and I feel such a wide gamut of emotions every single time I watch it. And from here, the responsibility he carried throughout the trek is now carried onto Ursula, who he entrusted with his security card. And after it's all said and done, Ursula helps build a new greenery within the space of the Demeter. Such a complicated arc about mutual trust, responsibility versus leisure, and being sensitive to nature as well as yourself. And this is only one of the arcs worth covering. Of our main characters, we spend the least time with Kamen, for reasons that are obvious if you've watched it. So let's get into the main theme going on with him. Abandonment. We find out in flashback that he convinced his wife Fiona to come along with him on this trek just cause he thinks it'd be a fun way to spice up his life.
I can't just drop everything and leave. I like my life.
Of course you can. We can work together. It would be amazing. I mean, look at this place, Fiona. What else could it offer us? Honestly.
Already, there's a clear stain going on in their relationship, of how selflessly he seems to be going about these decisions.
If I can do good here, things will calm down and, I don't know, maybe we can figure things out.
This reaches its worst when he tries to get the Demeter to steer closer to the sun, which... And as if that didn't break him enough, upon boarding his escape pod, he spots Fiona still on the carrier, and right when she approaches the window... God damn, man. So he's basically stuck having to wallow in pain for his misdeeds. And it's here that he falls victim to this beast, what apparently is named the Hollow? Sure, okay. That seems quiet, if a little creepy at first glance. Only to take advantage of his guilt by making him constantly hallucinate Fiona and using that to do its bidding. And anytime we cut back, you can bet you'll see on painful display just how broken this guy is.
Stop it. That's enough. Please.
Kamen, just relax. Everything's gonna be fine.
Jesus, man. Not only that, but he's unknowingly being further corrupted by being fed this black goo. And if that wasn't enough, the creature later freaking swallows him. God, what vivid symbolism. And from then on, he just kinda sets out most of the plot, only being awakened from his coma when something from the outside world shakes his tormented nerves.
Fiona.
Animated shows where protags make serious mistakes, even disastrous life-threatening ones, are a dime a dozen. But rarely do we get something that makes them have to really live with it, and almost never make them do so in such a relentless, brutal fashion. It's painful to sit with in the moment, but so powerful in a manner that just burns into your head.
Maybe I'll stop by.
Now, Ozzy is probably my personal favorite of the Demeter gang here, because she represents what it means to come out of your shell of introversion and realize your inner desires and true personal strengths. Being the cargo manager, constantly working in the back room, when we first get to know her, she generally keeps to herself, constantly trying in vain to get a radio signal working, insisting her only companion Levi not butt in, and just trying to build a sustainable living environment of her own until an escape comes.
Unfortunately, 92% of our current crop has been destroyed, and our food supplies are almost depleted. And that was our last flare.
She will snap back when provoked, but you can tell she is always thinking, God, I am so done with this shit. This goes especially when it comes to Levi, who gradually behaves well beyond their established programming, specifically how this little fungus infection seems to be giving them a mind of their own, how they form an instant bond with the insects and plant life of the planet, and most strangely, how they start to feel, as if they have nerves.
Did you just flinch?
I'm not sure. I was reacting to a strange sensation.
What kind of sensation?
I don't know. It's something I've never felt before.
What is going on?
This at first annoys Ozzy, of course, only for the gradually increasing consciousness allowing for a companionship that makes her start to appreciate the company.
So you like singing? Anything else you like doing?
I guess I'm still figuring that out.
Especially since it reminds her of one specific person she actually did hit it off with on the Demeter, Mia. Also, they're gay. This scene in episode 6 is definitely a big turning point in Ozzy's behavior, casually humming these tunes with Levi as they work to cross a trench together. This is when her plot merges with Kamen and Hollow, and therefore the alien, still using Kamen's conscience to feed into their hunger, snaps up and after an intense fight, freaking obliterates Levi. Therefore, Ozzy seeks vengeance in the creature in the back of her mind for pretty much the rest of the show. This leaves as big an impact as it does because of how the individual events across both of their arcs have naturally led to this point. And much like real life itself, it comes biting you in the rear when you least expect it. It's clear that she is the kind of person who doesn't think she desires company with how much she's all alone, but deep down, she does. And so it's one thing when she feels like she's been ripped by someone else she's hit it off with. It's another when the next best thing, and a fascinating phenomenon in its own right, gets quite literally ripped to 1,000 pieces. This is the breaking point for her, where all she can do is make one last attempt at a radio call.
This is Ursula Sam of the planetary freighter ship Demeter 227. I am marooned on planet Vesta, alone. If anyone is hearing this, I need rescue now. Now, please. Please.
And as luck would have it, this one manages to pull through. But it isn't as though she's suddenly fine because help has come over. When Kris's crew comes over to help rescue, yeah, I haven't even mentioned these folks before since they come in for the second half, but trust me, I'll talk more about them. All Ozzy is really focused on at this point is to get back to the Demeter and bring with her as many of the surviving passengers in cryosleep as possible, as she now considers them the true cargo of the mission. Which of course makes Kris's belief that anyone who doesn't conveniently benefit your mission as dead weight really not sit right with her.
That fear you were carrying with you is gone now. If there's anything else you have to let go, let it go now.
Are you fucking crazy? Pull me up!
The moment when she finally snaps at Kris's selfish actions feels unbelievably satisfying, knowing how much she turned others away and even her own Levi earlier.
Don't do this. They're alive. They didn't do anything to either of you. You can't just abandon us here.
What do you know about being abandoned? This'll toughen you up.
Fuck you!
And that's not even getting into how she learns to really take in the nature around her, and when it's time to just go with the flow. And thanks to her observant nature and Levi's advice earlier, by the end, Ozzy is able to make it through obstacles like it's nothing. At least among the humans, she's the one who ends the series being most at peace with the nature of Vesta.
Yeah, the boss.
Alright, so these three are going to be interesting to talk about, because they all entered the scene in episode 7, just after the midway point, and they are all pretty firmly tied to each other with not much known about them independently. See, they are the smaller group of scavengers that hear Ozzy's distress call and come in to make a deal with her so she can make it out.
No offense, but it's that very cargo that we're interested in.
Instead of letting the cargo rot, let us take it. In return, we'll take you or anyone that wants to come and we'll drop you off at the nearest outpost. Then it's up to you, but at least it's a chance.
No, of course. That's a fair deal.
Excellent.
So right off the bat, they're being very opportunist, but nothing too sketchy. But very quickly it becomes apparent that even though they all like to pretend they are all given equal power, Kris is the one calling all the shots.
Alright, you know the rules. New planet, new atmosphere, new leader. Last one standing directs the mission.
Yes! Kris is that firm deuce who only really cares about herself and insists on everything going her way. And you better not be slacking off either.
Get up and help. We can't afford dead weight right now.
Sorry, I asked him about it.
You're always going on and on
Terrence,
about...
shut the hell up.
She's not doing this out of malice, but more so out of pure cynicism. Being brought down by the world enough that she's defaulted to viewing people, including her peers most of the time, as dead weight.
Look, the company has probably already written you off. Nobody's coming. These people, these strangers, they're weight, dragging you down.
So when Ozzy firmly protests over wanting to free all the people in cryosleep, she becomes useless in Kris's eyes and just leaves her tied up. In many respects, Ozzy and Kris feel like parallels of each other, where they both go much of their lives without seeking much company.
Helping to establish yet another colony for a bunch of assholes who couldn't care less about you.
Sounds familiar.
But while one has learned to open up and take in their surroundings more, the other just sees both as a means to an end. Tough shit, life's not fair.
Are they still alive? It's not our problem.
She's just the right level of detestable, enough that you want to punch her in the face, but still grounded enough in reality where you can still imagine actually finding someone like her, if you haven't already. And yeah, as for the other two, for one, Terrence fucking dies, which leaves Barry to both be Kris's main scapegoat, and someone who is only able to feel grief over the loss of his companion with Ozzy's own support.
I don't think he would want us making a rash decision because of that.
Well, thanks for letting me know what you think Terrence would have wanted.
No one is really blaming him for being in the position he's in, but eventually he will have to realize when what they're doing is wrong and stand up for himself, the Demeter, and the sanctity of Vesta.
You want to stay and help a bunch of strangers instead of returning to our home. Yes.
Oh, Barry. When did you become so selfish?
I know how it feels to lose someone. And they're not strangers. They mean something to Ozzy, and Ozzy's my friend too.
Well, you're your own man. I can't stop you.
Wait! Don't leave me here! I trusted you!
Not much more to say about him. He's just another good character with strong weighted messages to him, just not as much as everyone else.
I just wanted to help.
I know, Barry. You're right.
Absolutely.
Out of every character in the whole show, the single most fascinating, and probably most likely to leave an impact, is none other than the helper bot, Levi.
You've just been acting so strange lately.
I've already talked about a lot of the basic and early stuff, as they really are so closely tied to Ozzy, so you'd think I would have little left to cover here. But not quite, because they represent a whole bunch of ideas, to the point of arguably being the main glue that holds the whole story together. The most explicit is, of course, becoming one with nature. How the pure, free-roaming, mysterious environment of Vesta quite literally injects life into them. Enabling them to have instincts, desires, and thoughts.
The world shares things with me that I couldn't possibly experience by myself. Things that are far beyond what's right in front of me.
Not dissimilar to the wild robot, they slowly become a sort of caretaker for the creatures. As early as episode 2, they are shown to have made their own little creative touches inside their own little greenhouse cave, even if they can't yet comprehend what exactly is going on.
They're just things I've been compelled to do. I can't explain why.
Over the next several episodes, these symptoms only further and further surface to their conscience, to the point of pretty much becoming more of a person than a few of the actual people on the planet.
The sounds you just made, where did those come from?
I don't know, actually. They just came to me.
But alas, with humanity comes death. But even that's not actually where their story ends, because at the opening of a much later episode, all these little Vesta insects are seen carrying all of Levi's many, many broken parts, almost to mean the psychological connection between Levi and the Vestites is so strong, it's able to surpass the physical shell itself, and the very next time we see them, they are embracingly covered in tangles of greenery, at pure peace and having fully realized their newfound life.
Did you come down with this ship?
I was born here.
But of course, when their brethren senses danger to one of their allies, Levi will not hesitate to strike back once more, finally being the one to put the Hollow in their place for good, and does so with this sequence, which just goes beyond words. Just look at it. And on top of that, in the time skip, we see these little mini Levis be birthed and aww, just look at them. Why can't we have these, damn it? But in all seriousness, Levi's arc has such a psychological foundation to it that only a character as pure and unfiltered as them can possibly bring. And Scavengers Reign is also a story that just wouldn't be the same without their presence. They are utterly symbolic of how such an unfamiliar environment can fundamentally, and even scientifically, change a being, and how something as seemingly innate as passing the gift of nurturing can spawn a new, unimaginable life. Godspeed, you helper bot person, you.
You're alive.
Yes.
There is a lot to be said about how much these miracles in the increasingly hostile animation landscape tend to be taken for granted, both by the wide public and especially by the corporate system. And this show's existence really is nothing short of a miracle. Not just in being an original daring story at a time when the mainstream industry is downright discouraging it, but also how it got passed around by a bystanding exec before getting greenlit at the perfect time and barely got to see completion and release in the wake of a nasty merger, but most of all, as we found out midway through the making of this video, it getting a second chance at attention, heading over to Netflix in the US and more importantly, the UK. Clearly there are still people inside fighting for these masterpieces to get seen. And while none of this would be needed in a perfect world, it's little glimpses like this that do keep some hope alive in ours, and why we should keep up the fight in making them known. Even if things don't quite work out for our scavengers in the end, we got an amazing 12 episodes out of this super high concept, otherworldly art house short, and no amount of corporate interference is ever gonna take that away from us. But regardless of the fate of this and other gems of this type, the more we can allow them to live on in the public in spite of all their adversity, the better off we as a society and the world of art will be in the long term.